Birdie Jaworski, or Prudence Calabrese, first began remote viewing in 1996. She became the vice president of the Farsight Institute, and then soon after established her own remote viewing organization called TransDimensional Systems. And she was very successful with TransDimensional Systems to the extent that she was able to see the destruction of the Twin Towers, and that brought her to the attention of the intelligence community, who visited her and basically threatened her and her collaborator John Vivanco at the time. And so Prudence dropped out of the scene and for 22 years just concentrated on raising her family and doing other things, but continued her remote viewing sessions, but privately and not really doing very much at all in the public arena until recently, where she has come back and has been doing some amazing remote viewing.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Birdie, to the show.
Thank you, Michael. I am excited to be here.
Yes, well, that you have a really fascinating background, and I'm sure a lot of my audience don't know you. So, why don't you kind of walk us through what happened in those early years when you got interested in remote viewing, and how things progressed to the extent that you were threatened and had to basically withdraw from the field for over 2 decades.
Yes, exactly. I first learned about remote viewing in 1995 when it was declassified by the government, the US government. They admitted at that time that they had spent over 20 years and $20 million of taxpayer money in something they called the Stargate Program, where they trained soldiers to become psychic spies, the first remote viewers. And I was fascinated. This was all over the news. The military guys that were in the program, these psychic spies, were making the media rounds. They were on all of the big news stations. And of course, this was before the modern age of the internet. So the internet was just in its public infancy then. So it was hard to get information on this. And I happened to be living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and actually was pregnant with my youngest child, who's now a grown up. But so I found out that there was a professor in Atlanta at Emory University, Dr. Courtney Brown, and he had just been trained by Major Ed Dames, one of these military remote viewers. And Courtney wanted to start a new educational institution that he named the Farsight Institute. So I bartered with Courtney and I traded building Farsight's first website for a seat in one of their very first classes. So I became one of the first civilians trained in remote viewing. And it ends up, I had a bit of a knack for it. Now everyone, literally everyone on the planet can learn to do this. We all have this natural, intuitive ability. But it's like learning a musical instrument. Some people can just pick up the clarinet and play, and some people need a lot of practice before they can join a band. And so I had some of that natural ability. So I worked at Farsight for a couple of years. I became the vice president, but I had some ideas, things I wanted to try on my own. I wanted to really kind of push the boundaries of remote viewing. And so I left Farsight and started my own company, TransDimensional Systems. And there I trained hundreds of people. We ended up with about 200 remote viewers in our organization, in our group. My second in command was John Vivanco, who you've had on your show, and he's a wonderful, wonderful human being and a great friend. And so we did so many interesting projects during that time. We looked actually at disclosure and what would happen. And at that time, 25-ish years ago, we even said it was going to happen in 25 to 30 years. And so now we're butting up against that time period right now, which is super interesting. All the things that we described are now just playing out in front of us. It's amazing. And so after a time, we were pushing the envelope. We were making predictions. We were accurate. We had a lot of law enforcement that were hiring us to work on missing persons and things like that. And the harassment started. Now, I was, to be fair, I was kind of in your face about things back then. I really did want to make a splash with this. I wanted everybody to know that they could learn this. And I had so many cool ideas at the time, but it started to rub people in the intelligence community the wrong way. And both John Vivanco and myself, we started getting visited by members of the spook community, government adjacent, private contractors, they never really quite identified themselves. They would drive around following us in these white unmarked vans with dark windows. They literally lined the cul-de-sac that I was living in at the time and bothered all of my neighbors. And then the phone calls started, that kind of harassment with threats, literally first threats against me. And that didn't bother me as much. I figured, well, it's just talk. But then when they started threatening my children, I had 5 children, very young at the time. And I was terrified. And I decided, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth putting my family's life in danger. So I shut down TransDimensional Systems. And I essentially kind of went underground, changed the name that I was operating under to Birdie from Prue. And then I just did all kinds of interesting things. I sold Avon door to door. I started a newspaper. I taught 8th grade, but I still kept remote viewing every single day, twice a day, in the early morning, in the evening. And I worked on developing my system. And in all those 22 years that I was out of the field, I managed to come up with a really cool new method of remote viewing that I call transdimensional mapping. It takes it kind of to the next level and allows you to understand what your subconscious is saying as you're working on your remote viewing. And so I came back into the field just over a year ago. I'm very excited. I'm now training people again and building an operational team, and we are having the time of our lives.
Fantastic. Now, in our pre-interview, you talked about basically seeing the destruction of the Twin Towers, and that was something that you thought was a major factor in why you began to get harassed, because clearly that was a planned false flag event. Or, well, anyway, what can you say about 9/11 and what happened, who was behind it? And
at the time, this was several years before 9/11, and I was given a task to remote view. Now, in remote viewing, most of the time, you remote view blind, meaning you don't know what it is that you've been given to remote view. You're only given a set of random numbers that someone has associated with that experience, with that target, as they say in the military system. And so the target was the next terror attack on the United States. And I didn't know what the target was. I just knew it was something to remote view. And it could have been the Taj Mahal, as far as I knew, or Disney World, or the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Di, all these things, that you remote view on a regular basis. So I started working on the session, and I ended up drawing the Twin Towers, the Statue of Liberty, which was my subconscious's way of saying this is New York. And I drew planes flying into the towers. Now, at the time, none of this made sense to me. I looked at it and I didn't realize that what I had drawn were planes. I thought I had drawn those kind of cartoony bombs, like in Roadrunner, they have the bombs with the little wings on them. So I thought that that's what I was drawing, that it was like a bombing. Didn't realize what it was. And, we posted it on our website. We didn't really say much about it. It was just there. And then when 9/11 happened, kind of all hell broke loose at that point, and we made the media rounds, just like the military guys had done some years before. And even outlets like the London Sunday Times sent reporters to not only interview us and take photos, they literally took our training and had incredible experiences themselves. Even the women's magazine Cosmopolitan sent a reporter out to take my class, which was super fun. And of course, the resulting article is called "How to Be a Psychic Spy and Have Multiple Orgasms." Okay. It's Cosmo. They had to fit the sex angle in.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So, yeah, but what was interesting, if you look back at that data, because I looked back at it after the fact, in 9/11, there are a lot of strange things that don't quite add up, in terms of the official narrative, what people reported seeing and experiencing at the time, and all of this. Of course, the session I did was small at the time. It wasn't a big project. It was just a standalone session. But I did get in there within all the language that I wrote on different pages outside of the sketching, that there was something unusual about this. This was extremely destructive, but there was this idea that the storyline didn't match what people were being told. So I do think that there, were a lot of strange things around 9/11 for sure.
So can you explain the difference between military grade remote viewing, which usually uses the double blind protocol, and the kind of say single blind studies, and how what was done at Farsight in those early years and what you did in TransDimensional Systems, how that was different or similar to the military grade double blind remote viewing?
Yes. So in a double blind situation, you don't know what you're being given. And typically you are getting your task, your target, from a big pool of targets, maybe 1,000 or 10,000 targets. And so nobody exactly knows what you're looking at in that moment. And so that's traditionally how the military set up their experiments. Now, however, they did have their remote viewers, their psychic spies, doing things single blind, meaning somebody knew what it was and directly gave them the target. And so they did a mix. At Farsight, we almost entirely did single blind sessions at the time. I'm not sure if Farsight's still in existence. I know they have some incredible remote viewers on their team, and I'm not really sure what their protocol is today. But at the time, it was single blind. Courtney, Dr. Brown knew what it was he was giving to the students, or I knew what I was giving to the students if I was one of the trainers at the time. And then at TransDimensional Systems, we did a combination of single blind and double blind. And today at in my transdimensional mapping classes, it's also a combination. Some of the classes we do a lot of double blind because the students, maybe they've been trained in other remote viewing methods and they really want to have like the hardest possible targets, so they want it double blind. Some of them are single blind. We do a combination. Almost everything that I map out, that I remote view these days is double blind. I have a pool of over 8,000 targets, experiences as I call them, and it's all kind of computerized. I have a combination of like literally targets and envelopes that are in these huge moving tubs, like when you pack up your house to move, and they fill completely my shed in the backyard. And so I was doing it by just pulling out envelopes at random. I then moved to a computerized system over this past year, getting back into the field. So now everything's on my computer. If I want to remote view something, I click a button, a little program that I wrote. I'm a computer scientist as well. And out pops the random numbers. And if I want to get what be revealed as to what it was, I just input the numbers, click a button, and boom, it either shows me a photograph or the written target, depending on what it is. Yeah.
Right. So can you explain what are the advantages of doing a remote viewing using these blind protocols vis-a-vis people? And you see a lot of this today. There's a lot of people who have kind of like YouTube channels, and they have an audience, and they'll say, well, let me remote view what's happening right now in Russia over there, and so they'll kind of like do a remote view. So they choose the target themselves, and they're doing something and getting some information, and it sounds good, but I mean, how reliable is that?
That's a really great question. So that's called being front-loaded in the remote viewing community. That's the language we use. Front-loading means that you know what it is when you start the session. So you go in knowing you're going to look for this serial killer, or you're going to look at Three-Eye Atlas, or what have you. And can you remote view front-loaded? Absolutely, you can. I sometimes do some of my law enforcement work front-loaded, missing persons and things like that. If you're very experienced, you learn what the data feels like. The problem, though, with front-loading is that you tend to get your own ideas about things mixed in with the data, because you can't divorce yourself from the process. We all come into this with our educational, religious, social backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, the way we were grown, the way we were raised, all of this stuff plays into it. And so when you're developing a narrative in your remote viewing, if you already think you know what it's going to be, that can cloud your data. So I prefer not to do front-loaded work for that reason. I only do it in very limited cases, like if it's an emergency and I get a call from the state police because a woman's gone missing right then and there. There's not time for me to set this up as a blind thing that maybe I'll get a month down the road. It needs to happen right then. So that's the only time when I really do that.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, that's important because people are using the word or the term remote viewing for what seems to be very different things. So it's good to know exactly what that all is. So you've mentioned transdimensional. We've mentioned TransDimensional Systems, which was what you set up and ran with John Vivanco in the 1990s and had to close down. And more recently, you set up transdimensional mapping. So what's the difference?
Yeah, transdimensional mapping is my new method of remote viewing. It is a very visually oriented method. And in the old military style, which almost everyone practices who's in remote viewing, the old military style was called CRV for controlled remote viewing or coordinate remote viewing. They kind of use both terms. And all of the different schools of remote viewing thought that have developed since are derivatives of CRV. We've got Farsight with SRV, scientific remote viewing. Major Ed Dames had his TRV, technical remote viewing. So everybody kind of maybe massage the military protocols a little bit, put their own little twist on it, but it's still a derivative of CRV. And I wanted to get out of that mindset because in a military style session, you are getting discrete pieces of data. The system is set up to keep your left brain busy because our brains have two hemispheres, and the left brain is the controlling, manipulative part of you. It's the part that wants an answer. It wants to know something and put a label on it. And that's the part that trips you up when you're remote viewing. It's the part that will make conclusions about things that might be not entirely direct or true. And your right brain is your intuitive, gentle, more loving, more open, puzzle-loving side. And that's the side that gives you the data. So in the military method, you keep your left brain busy and your right brain pops out little pieces of data. And it works. It works. All of these systems of remote viewing work wonderfully. So I'm not at all bashing the military style system. I learned on that, and that's what I did for the first 16 years as a remote viewer. I've been in this 30 years. So, and then I started developing this new system. My first maps I did about 14 years ago. And so I decided instead of getting teeny tiny pieces of data and not really understanding what I was experiencing until the end and someone gave me the answer, the reveal, I really wanted to have a real experience. I wanted to see it and smell it and taste it and feel it and know what's going on right in the middle of it. So I developed this new system that allows you to do that. It's quite different from the military method. And it invites you to take whatever your subconscious is giving you, even all of those conclusions, even all of those labels, and while you're doing your remote viewing, break those down into their essential elements. And that gives you the whole story. And so people that are learning this new method, they are having true bilocation type experiences where they really feel that they are there. It's so alive to them. It's amazing. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, that's very interesting. You mentioned bilocation. So
Yes.
Remote viewing, is that essentially a kind of bilocation?
It is, or at least I think it should be, but it truly is a form of bilocation. So, for example, in one of my student classes recently, I gave them an experience, a target, which was a photograph of all these little kids at a county fair, and they were having a pie eating contest. And so the photograph shows all these kids around this big table and they're stuffing themselves full of pie. And there's a guy there with a stopwatch in the photo. And one of my students literally felt so sick while she was remote viewing this, she sincerely thought that she was going to vomit because she became part of the scene. It was like all that pie was going into her and it was making her feel upset. And another example, I gave out a photograph of Jacques Cousteau under the sea, famous oceanic explorer. And he's there in his diving suit, swimming around with some fish. And one of my students was sitting down and I was watching her because she started swaying back and forth like this. And I thought maybe she wasn't feeling well. And I went over to her. I said, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "No, I'm underwater." She knew where she was. She could see everything around her, and it felt as real as being underwater feels. So bilocation is real. The more that you practice any kind of remote viewing, the more bilocation you have and the more visceral these experiences become.
Fantastic. Now, during those 22 years where you had to go underground and just raise your family and do other things, you still did the remote viewing.
Yes.
And you did say, well, you've described doing 300 sessions on the history of grey aliens and the interactions with Earth over an 8-year period. So, you want to give us a thumbnail sketch of what you found?
Oh, that was a really cool project. It's kind of still ongoing. I wrote up around 400 different tasks, different targets, and I put them in my pool. And it took me 8 years to get through the bulk of those because, like I said, I'm pulling these out at random. They're double blind. I might be getting a photograph of Mount Rushmore, or it might be some verifiable event. Most of what I do is verifiable, but there's a small percentage that are the fun things I throw in there. So it took a while to get through all of this. And what I learned, and it is absolutely fascinating. So the gray aliens, they are true extraterrestrials. They did come from another planet out there. Their planet was dying. This was due to technology run amok. They left the planet in these huge ships. They sent out several of these absolutely enormous motherships, I guess you could call them. They kind of are shaped like a bullet with a little bit of a pointed head. And one of them ended up landing here on Earth. It was kind of a crash landing. It landed in the ocean near what today is the Antarctic. Now, this was billions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago anyway. It was a very, very long time ago. So the continents on the Earth look very different today than they did at the moment that the Greys crashed. And it took them eons to kind of repair their ship, and they started building smaller ships, which they then started flying around the surface of the planet. And they've been with us ever since. In fact, they predate human history because they were here before we evolved. They were here at the time the comet or meteor or whatever it was took out the dinosaurs, whatever that big thing was that crashed. They were here on the planet at that time. So in a way, it's as much their planet as it is our planet. And so they are spacefaring. They managed to get themselves back up into that over all these millennia, but they have been monitoring us. They have been involved in genetic manipulation across our planet, not just in terms of human beings, but in terms of plants and animals. They've been very instrumental in making all kinds of small incremental changes because to them, this is their planet. They sincerely feel that this is their planet. And who's to say it isn't? They've been here longer than we have.
Well, that's a very interesting question because there's a lot of literature out there describing different extraterrestrials that came here and kind of bioengineered humans and made
Right.
us in their image. And some talk about, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the Alex Collier material, where he
Yes.
describes 22 different extraterrestrial species that
Yes.
bioengineered humanity in different experiments, and the Anunnaki are one of them. Now, I do
Absolutely.
remember the Greys being among that. I mean,
Yeah,
they're more
they definitely were.
recent.
They were. They were definitely part of it, especially very, very early on. Now, I have looked at the Anunnaki and a number of other species, and yes, they too were involved in genetic manipulation for their own reasons. They wanted, whether they wanted slaves or they wanted people to do their bidding, or they were interested in the future of our species and humanity. It's probably a combination of all of these things, but the Greys were involved in this too, for certain.
Now, I guess the question is that in terms of the historical influence in human genetics, I mean, did they call themselves Greys? I mean, or did they refer to a particular planet or something?
Yeah, they had their own, they have to this day their own names and their own ways of understanding who they are. Greys, we came up with that because they're short, they're grayish, not quite gray, but close
Mhm.
enough. And so we came up with that name, but they definitely have a designation for themselves. They are they're not clones entirely. They're not a mix of biology and technology. These are biological creatures. They do reproduce asexually. They are more built, kind of like a clone, but it's different. It's not entirely clone. They are individuals, but they also have a hive presence where they are completely a telepathic society, and they're able to think and to converse much like we breathe, just in and out, that easy kind of way that we breathe. That's their telepathic communication with each other.
I remember the Sasquatch message to humanity kind of like corroborates what you just said, because they say that prior to humans there were the reptilians, and prior to the reptilians were the insectoids. So if we kind of like view Greys as in insectoids, then it's quite. I mean, that would match this history according to the Sasquatch message to humanity, that they were here millions of years ago, before humans, before reptilians, were these insectoids that I guess included praying mantis, Greys, and that kind of mix.
Yes, all of those are very ancient species. They've been around a extremely long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you? And I guess this kind of like relates to that. I mean, the ant people. I mean, I've got someone that I've been working with, former military, and he's met these ant people in these underground civilizations, and they kind of like have some of these characteristics of Greys, and they look insectoid. So is that an example of this kind of like ancient insectoid Grey presence here?
Yes. Ant people, I think, are very closely related to the Greys. It might even be an offshoot, to be quite honest, of actually that's part of what I'm hoping to look at in the near future. It's part of this project that I've been working on for a long time. That I think that they are kind of an offshoot or related in some way to the Greys. The ant people are fascinating. And here in New Mexico, some of our indigenous populations have stories about these ant people. So it's of great interest to me.
Now, I know you remote viewed underground bases, and there's a kind of very famous example, and I think the CIA released this. This is where Pat Price was tasked with 4 underground facilities under these mountains. Well, he described 4 underground facilities in these mountains, one in Alaska, one in Australia, one in South Africa, and I forgot the 4th one. I mean, did you ever remote view any of those mountains?
Yes, I have gotten the same underground bases. I think things have changed in the years since Pat Price first looked at this. There's definitely more technology involved, very advanced technology that hasn't been released to the public, of course. The government and the secret groups, they're 50, 100 years ahead of us in terms of what we, the poor lowly consumer, are allowed to know about. So there's a lot of technology, but they also have some very interesting other underground bases that have been built, I'd say, over the past 10, 20 years. And this kind of goes into this project I'm currently working on, The Biggest Secret in the World, doing a number of taskings on this, because there is this huge push now where they're building enormously sized bunkers, almost like arks of some sort, that are going to house the select few, those chosen, when this big kind of catastrophe happens that they are completely expecting. They are expecting it's more like Earth changes, maybe a huge solar flare, maybe pole shift. It's related to huge Earth changes. And so they are creating these underground bunkers to save the best, the brightest, the youngest, the, people. We're not on that list, Michael. You know what I mean? The powers that be.
Right. Okay, that's interesting, because it's kind of similar to that movie 2012, that disaster movie, where they built these huge arcs, ocean arcs, to kind of like ride out flooding and earth changes. So you're seeing that happening in a lot of these underground bases now. And are these arcs designed for space travel?
Some of them are. They're underground right now, but they are designed for space travel. Some are designed just for waiting it out under the earth. But some are enormous arcs in the true sense that they're going to take people to some other location. Now, I believe we have a secret space program anyway, and this has been going on for some time. And this is an extension of that secret space program.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And what else did you see in the underground bases? I mean, people have been talking about a lot of kind of like darker things happening there. So, what else have you seen?
Yeah. Well, some of these underground facilities have groups of remote viewers, military trained remote viewers. And I have looked extensively at those groups, mainly because I wanted to find out, what are they doing? What can I learn from them or take from them? Right now, most of those groups, government, secret government adjacent, defense contractor, remote viewer groups, they are using an incredible amount of technology to enhance their psi abilities. One of the things that they're doing, and I discovered this over 10 years ago, doing sessions on this, is that they're monitoring their brainwaves. Every single remote viewing data session that they do, they put on EEG style devices that measure their brainwaves, and they monitor their brainwaves because it can tell you literally what's there at the target. It can give you clues to what you're picking up. And so 10 years ago, I started doing the same thing. I thought, okay, if they're going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I bought a Muse, which is like a consumer headband style device that trains you in meditation, but it also measures your brainwaves, and you can watch your brainwaves when you have it on. And then I bought other devices over the years. And so now I absolutely monitor my brainwaves every single time. And what I've noticed in the brainwave data, it's fascinating. Certain kinds of brainwave patterns emerge, and that tells me something about what's there at the experience, at the target. Like there's a particular signal in my brainwaves that comes up if it involves extraterrestrials or any kind of ETs in some sort, non-human intelligence. There's another that, like, if there's a horse at the target, my brainwaves do a particular thing. So I've been able to use this EEG activity because I was spying on these secret remote viewing programs. But that's not the only thing going on in these underground bases. They are doing tests, all kinds of tests involving things like human cloning. It's really kind of terrifying, the genetic and manipulation that they're doing with, this is kept very, very secret. They're trying to build super soldiers. They're trying to build superhumans that have, that are bigger, taller, stronger, faster, and have incredible psi activity. So they are looking at everyone's genetic codes. In fact, the people they choose for these remote viewing programs, they're looking at their genetics and doing genetic tests on all of them, and they look for particular markers. So there's a lot of creepy stuff going on underground.
I know that there's been some kind of like soft disclosure movies talking about this. I mean, you have the
Yes.
X-Men. There's a series, Babylon 5, that also talks about something called Psychor, where I think
Yes.
they kind of like describe people, they categorize psychics on their abilities. I think it was a 1 to 10 scale. 10 being,
Right.
I mean, someone that could kind of make the room around you dissolve into ocean or something so
Yes.
incredible. So, yeah, I mean, is that real?
I do think so. Yeah, absolutely. They are trying to determine who on this planet has the absolute best abilities in this area. They are co-opting some of these people. They're testing genetics. They're doing genetic experiments to try to grow this ability in their chosen people. And absolutely, some of these remote viewers in these secret programs are absolutely incredible. They can do things with their minds. They can do telekinesis, move things with their minds. And we all have these abilities on an innate level. And the more that we work on our abilities, we can become quite excellent. But they are using techniques that go beyond simple practice. They are using all different kinds of technologies to enhance this experience, including drugs, nootropic style drugs that enhance the abilities, all kinds of interesting things. It's terrifying, to be
Yeah, yeah.
honest.
Well, that is. What about government remote viewers running interference on civilian remote viewers like yourself who are trying to probe into something like an underground facility? Did you encounter government remote viewers kind of messing with you when you were trying to see what was going on at particular targets?
Yes, and this is one of the things I actually teach in my more advanced classes. Uh, they are able to set up blocks, and some non-humans like gray aliens and reptilians and others, they can set up blocks so that you can't see or perceive beyond that block. But I was able to figure out ways to get around these blocks, and so I teach these anti-blocking techniques in my advanced class, and so that you can get in to see what's in that underground bunker or what's in that spaceship. And it works very well. Now, sometimes it does irritate the person who's put up the block. And so you have to kind of balance whether it's worth the risk. They can't hurt you. There's nothing they can do to hurt you. And in 30 years of doing this, and I have really pushed the envelope on so many times, it's insane. And I've never had a situation where I felt like anything bad was happening to me. No one's taken over my mind or my soul or my body. This is something we're already all connected to everything in this fine universe and beyond. And so it's just a question of turning your attention to these things. So nothing can hurt you, but they can try to set up these blocks, but it's pretty much a psychological tool on their end. We can put up blocks. I train people how to do that, how to put up your own block if you don't want someone remote viewing you. So, yeah.
What about remote viewing extraterrestrials? If you remote viewed, say, a spacecraft and went inside it, how sure can we be that what we're seeing is what's really in that ship as opposed to some screen memory projected by the ETs or by the ship itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be completely frank, you kind of just have to take it moment by moment and see what it feels like. Now, for example, if you were to give me as a blind session Santa Claus to remote view, I would get a fat, jolly man in a red cap and some snow and maybe some presents. And so even though Santa Claus is a myth that humanity's kind of co-created, and it came from the history of St. Nicholas and all of this, it's still not a real person. You would still get it as if it were a real person, but in your data, you would also get this aspect. You would get that it's a myth, that it's a story that we tell each other, that it's not entirely real. So you get what is expected to get, but you also get this idea that there's something funny going on here. It's not quite right. And so when I have looked at some extraterrestrial type things, whether I've gone on a ship or I've, like a good example is the Calvine UFO, famous photograph taken in the UK of this big diamond-shaped ship being chased by a Harrier jet. And these hikers had taken this series of photos, and Nick Pope had been holding on to this photo for a long time. And then he finally received some of these photos came to light, and it was all publicized a few years ago. So that's one of the sessions I did. And that there was one alien on that ship, one I had never encountered before. It was super interesting. But he was trying to put up screen memories and blocks, but I kept getting the idea that there's something not quite right here. There's something not real here. There's a manipulation of what I'm experiencing. So even when that does happen, you do know that it's happening, especially if you're very practiced and you know what these things feel like. Now, a new student, they wouldn't realize that. To them, it would just feel completely real because they haven't done it enough to get all those different flavors of data.
Now, something happened to me at a conference back in 2024 in France, and there was a night a sky watching event at night, and there was a white light up there, and I looked at it, and all of a sudden I found myself inside it. I could see inside it, and I could see the crew, and when they kind of like saw me or saw my consciousness, almost like they kind of stood up and in a line as though they were, I guess, standing to attention. You know, like when an officer arrives on a ship, they're standing to attention. So, yes. Was that like a case of spontaneous remote viewing, or what was that?
Yes, that I would call that spontaneous remote viewing. We do it literally all day long. If you just pay attention, you might be walking down the street and you just get this feeling someone's staring at you, and you turn around and sure enough, someone's staring at you. Or you think about your sister, and 10 minutes later, the phone rings and it's your sister, even though you haven't talked with her in a few weeks. We do this constantly, but sometimes it's more like that experience you just described, where you just have this whole like immersive experience. Now I would call that a bilocation experience, Michael. I truly would. So, but that is spontaneous remote viewing. It happens to everybody at one time or another.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, last year, at the actually beginning of 2025 and the end of last year, there were all of these drones appearing over military facilities in the kind of US East Coast, New Jersey, New York. So, yeah, I mean, they were a big mystery. So what do you know about those drones?
I did a number of sessions on these, and everyone can go watch me map them out live on my YouTube channel. The New Jersey drones were not drones. These were shape-shifting craft that were sentient. This is craft that are sentient. So some of them may have had some kind of intelligence on board, but many of them didn't have like a living body on board, but the craft itself was intelligence. It could morph into orbs. It could morph into something that looked like a military style drone, but it would be a little bit off. It could morph into a helicopter shape or an airplane. And to this day, these drones, people are still seeing them every single night in New Jersey. This phenomenon hasn't stopped. The media stopped giving it attention, but it has continued. One of my sons lives in New Jersey, in Hoboken, and he said, "Mom, we can see them outside every single night." And now we're starting to see them in Northern Europe, in Norway, in Finland, and other areas. These drones are now showing up, and it's the same kind of phenomenon that these are sentient. They are monitoring. They're waiting for something. This is it's a true kind of rise up of non-human intelligence, because I believe we're headed towards some big changes on this planet and some big surprises ahead. And I think that these guys are along for the show. They're interested in what we're doing. And the drones themselves, whatever they are, they were highly fixated on the activities of our sun. That kept coming up in my sessions, just out of the blue. The sun, that we are really watching what's going on with the sun. I believe our sun's undergoing a transformation. I mean, I think scientists would agree with that. We're at solar maximum right now. We just had all these solar flares. And here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I was able to photograph the aurora borealis the night before last, just because of this increased solar flare activity. But they're interested in that. And they're continuing. Their numbers are growing, and they're monitoring what we're up to. And they want us to wake up. It's like they're saying, hey, we're here. We want to wake up.
Oh, I see. Something just happened to the screen there. Oh, that's interesting.
Interference.
Yeah, all of a sudden we were just kind of knocked out. All right. Well,
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, we must be talking about some cool stuff here.
Yeah, we must be, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. So the sun is a big player as far as what's happening on the Earth. So,
yes.
Okay. So the New Jersey drones, a lot of those were actually some kind of sentient organic craft.
Right.
People saw them coming out of the ocean as well.
And they're going in and out of the ocean. Exactly. There's so many underwater bases. It's crazy. I did a session on the Tic Tac that Commander David Fravor reported in the Navy, that famous case that came out in December of 2017 in the New York Times, where these Navy pilots, they had these encounters with these Tic Tac shaped craft, and they saw the craft go down and dive into the ocean. And I did a session. In fact, it was a live session in front of a group of students. They gave it to me to remote view. So I remote viewed it in front of them, and I got the Tic Tac, but I also got that it was going in the water. And there was this enormous, enormous facility under the water there off the coast of Southern California. And it was almost like a Tic Tac factory. And there were hundreds of these arrayed in a spiral pattern. And, we have places like this all over the planet that you can look at. There are bases in the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of our oceans. There are underwater bases off of Alaska, certainly near Antarctica. That is a hotbed of extraterrestrial activity. Actually, many different kinds of extraterrestrials have bases down in the Antarctic region.
Fascinating. There's also, I've interviewed a couple of people that talked about encountering underground or underwater cities in the Bermuda Triangle region, the Bahamas. Did you ever kind of come across cities, underwater cities?
I have on one occasion, I have seen an underwater city, and this was, I was looking into Atlantis. It was Atlantis a myth? Is it just a story people told? I believe it was a real place. Absolutely. And so in looking at Atlantis at the height of its civilization, it was partially underwater, partially above water, really quite a remarkable city, very high tech, but also very organic, a lot of crystalline type structures. Beings, different kinds of extraterrestrials were involved with humanity at that point. And so that was, it was incredibly beautiful and interesting. You could just tell that they were interested in art and poetry and music and philosophy. It was kind of the best of humanity at the time, mixed with some non-human intelligence. And I'm sad that it's no longer with us. Just the remnants are still there.
Right.
Yeah.
People talk about these ancient Atlantean halls of records and artifacts, and some are saying these are kind of activating as new fleets of ships come in. So
exactly, yeah,
very, very interesting. Now, you did a remote viewing of 3i Atlas. I think you've done a 3-part YouTube remote viewing of 3i Atlas. So, you want to just say what you found?
Yeah, 3i Atlas is interesting. I happened to remote view this actually on July 31st. It was the day before I left to teach a class in Wilmington, North Carolina. I was co-teaching a class with the experiencer Chris Bledsoe. So I was teaching my remote viewing during the day, and Chris was having sky watches on the beach at night to call down the orbs for the students. And so the day that I mapped this was the day right before I took off for the class. I ended up giving this to my students as well, and I'll talk about their data in a minute. But what I got, now I didn't know much about 3I Atlas at the time. This was part of just my pool of experiences that came out at random. So I got a natural but unusual astronomical object moving through space on a directed path. And it was comet-like, but there were some interesting things about this. Yes, it's a natural comet-style astronomical object, a little unusual, probably because it is interstellar, but it had something inside of it, a payload, if you will. And when I looked back to see how this happened, I found that this object had many, many, many billions of years ago, when it passed this one particular star system, much like it's coming through our star system now, there was a civilization there, very ancient, very old, very wise civilization. And their civilization was dying off, just sort of a natural death. Their planet had been depleted to some degree, and they were no longer able to reproduce. And so they were kind of dying off. And they sent out, just like we sent out the Voyager probe with our music and art and science and mathematics, they created something like that, but way more advanced compared to Voyager. It is like a compendium of everything that they've ever known and learned and thought, their music, their mathematics. Math is extremely important to these people. And they sent it off, a little probe out to the comet, and they had like a little robot arm come out of the probe, and it drilled a hole into the comet, and they inserted this thing. In my session, I say, well, it's like a thumb drive, because it's a storage device, but it's way more high tech than that. And so this device is in there, and it's broadcasting this repeated message. And we got that message years ago. And maybe that's the wow signal. I have future sessions I plan on doing on this. So when I get to those, I'll share those with the public. But it's fascinating. This whole civilization has sent this, and many other civilizations have noticed it as this 3I Atlas has continued its journey through our universe, through the galaxy. And so it's nothing bad. There's nothing bad or negative about it. It's actually a beautiful message, I think, that would really resonate with humanity. But I also got, which is pretty interesting, is that our scientists, now they're monitoring this comet, 3I Atlas, and hey, we haven't been given very much information by the powers that be. NASA's not releasing the photos. It's very curious. But one of the probes that's out there, I ended up describing this probe, and I said, this is a human-made probe, and I drew a scientist that was associated with it. And I got that this particular probe was going to be instrumental in understanding something important about 3I Atlas. It was going to pick up perhaps the broadcast, the message, maybe get even more data on that, and that this would happen likely in December. Now, this probe that I drew, it looks just like this probe called Lucy. And I was even singing during the session, wrote it down, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And it ends up that they have a big plate made of diamond inside that probe. So that's why I got that as data. So that probe is going to be picking up information about 3I Atlas in December. So it's a fascinating case, and I'm really enjoying hearing everyone's experiences with this and their thoughts on 3I Atlas. We haven't had an extraterrestrial visitor quite like this, and it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating watching it because, so far all of the images are taken from great distances, and
right.
and they're seeing kind of like something that doesn't have the usual long comet tail behind it, and so it seems that at some point then they're going to realize that this is no comet, that it's in fact an ancient spacecraft.
Right. Right. I think that whatever that civilization put into the comet, it's able to maneuver that comet. So it's kind of like a mix of the natural and this technology. Yeah.
Okay. So you think that the builders of that craft, they actually designed it to look like a comet, but it still has things like maneuvering thrusters, because that seems to be what the most recent images have shown, that there
Right.
seems to be thrusters there that are
Right,
pushing it in one
exactly.
direction.
Yeah, exactly. It can move in ways that it shouldn't be able to move if it were just strictly a natural object. So there's something that is involved in propelling this forward, choosing which direction it intends to go. And I think that it's kind of deliberately making stops along the way, so to speak, or deciding who it wants to visit. And I think
Mhm.
we're on that list. Clearly, we're of interest.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's, I mean, to me, it's such an elegant way of awakening a planet like ours, especially
Yes,
given the decades of secrecy and the governments haven't disclosed anything. To all of a
exactly.
sudden, like, you have this comet, and supposed comet, and then then the astronomers kind of like discover that, well, it's a spacecraft.
Right. And Avi Loeb has been pretty upfront about how this does not look like a natural comet. And so I've been enjoying listening to his take on this. And it's always nice to have a member of the actual science community backing up these kinds of things that we just know
Mhm.
intuitively. So it's pretty wonderful. And what a time to be alive. It's just like the greatest moment in human history where, the world is about to know that we truly are not alone. Yeah, they've been working on soft disclosure now for about almost a decade, but we're getting, I think, to that big announcement point. I think that'll happen fairly soon.
Yeah, I agree. And
Yeah,
it's fascinating to see. I mean, you already mentioned that, like, NASA's actually withholding some images
right,
taken by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that are the highest resolution images taken so far, and they haven't released it. The Europeans have released
right,
something, the Chinese have released something, but they're pretty blurry. The
right.
highest camera on the orbiter, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, is more powerful, but they haven't released it.
They
But
have
yet, on
not.
the other and but yet, on the other hand, and maybe this is all kind of part of a kind of global initiative to disclose, you have this United Nations organization called the International Asteroid Warning Network
Yes,
issuing a worldwide kind of like comet viewing exercise involving 3i Atlas from November 27, which, from the date of recording, we're talking 2 weeks from now,
right.
November 27 up until January 27. So it's like all eyes on the skies, all eyes on 3i Atlas.
Exactly. Exactly. They're letting us know it's time to wake up, people. And I think it's a good way. This is a good method of disclosure because people, if you simply got out in front of the country, say you're the president of the United States, and you get out and you say, we are not alone, who is actually going to believe it? A lot of people would have trouble believing it. People that are on the other side of the political aisle would feel, well, I'm not going to trust him, right? And then you would have different religious factions saying, well, those are just really demons. We've got to stay away from this. But now we have a show and tell situation. Hey, guys, look up in the sky. We've got drones. We've got this really unusual comet shaped thing that's not quite a comet that's flying in overhead. Now people are starting to see and understand that this is reality. We are definitely in the midst of this cosmic symphony, and all of these different non-human intelligences, they're coming to play a part in this. I think that they're welcoming us to our next step as we venture out as cosmic citizens.
Yeah, I agree. I think definitely there's going to be some big disclosures coming.
Yes.
So as far as disclosures go, so this will be kind of like the first step. I mean, giant spacecraft. Who built it? Where'd they come from? I
Right.
mean, you can imagine all the speculation, but it'll open
Exactly.
people up. Uh, what about the inner Earth? I mean, have you kind of like looked inside of the Earth? I mean, there are stories about Telos and Shambhala, these inner Earth civilizations. Have you ever remote viewed any of that?
Yes, yes, there have been and are to this day some inner Earth civilizations. They keep to themselves. Some of them are spacefaring, but they've managed to live under the earth as well. And some of these places, they're incredibly beautiful. They've really done something nice with the place. They've made it look cool. Very, very ancient. And so those stories, when we have these kinds of mythologies, they all come from some nugget of truth. That's why they become so important to us and an important part of the way in which we share our experiences. And so, yes, there are absolutely underground civilizations, at least a couple that I've looked at. One in Tibet, which is really interesting. And a lot of the ancient traditions in that area talk about this civilization. So I took a look at it, and it's remarkable. It's a combination of human and non-human intelligence living together, working on different kinds of things, very, very spiritually evolved, technologically evolved, super interesting people.
Interesting. Yeah. The person I mentioned, JP, the military ex-US Army,
Yes.
He says he was taken into one of these underground locations, and it was like the ant people living with humans, but these humans were like refugees from the surface from like centuries ago. They escaped the 30 Years' War or whatever was happening there in the Americas at that time, the conquistadors or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of picked up things like that too, that, these people, they haven't had contact with the rest of humanity in a long time. And they did come from different kinds of a combination of different civilizations. But now that's who they are. They live with non-human intelligence, ant people, or other kinds of ETs, gray ETs, what have you. And they're working together. It's very, they're very tight working together. A lot of trust between non-human intelligence and humans in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Apparently, there's a very extensive network of underground cities all over the world. So, I mean, apart from that one in Tibet, did you kind of like come up with any other underground cities?
Yeah, well, definitely in Antarctica, a huge one, absolutely enormous one there. Very ancient, very ancient. Of course, you have the X-Files mythology that like talks about all that, but it's kind of similar to that. Huge motherships, a lot of things going on under there. There's one that's underground in northern China, very remote. And the Chinese government's very aware of this. In fact, they don't let anyone go into that part of China. It's very much kept, patrolled with soldiers. They don't want people to go in that area, and they've been trying to monitor and understand what that's all about. So that one's interesting too, just from a geopolitical perspective.
Yeah, I know there are all these ancient pyramids in China that the Chinese government have kept secret. They just kind of like cover them up, and
that's right.
Yeah, so you've confirmed that, I mean, with your remote viewing?
Yes. Yep. The Chinese government has concealed so many things. Of course, so has the United States government. So, not throwing stones at the Chinese, but they definitely have there's so many ancient things in that land, in China and in areas surrounding China, that they have kept quiet, that they have kept private, that they've pilfered for themselves, different kinds of technologies. And then like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, how we're building bunkers and things here in the United States. They're doing it too. So they are doing it in Russia and in many other different countries. The Chinese are very, very much building like these life arcs, bunkers, seed banks, their genetic samples from their population, so that they have this like catalog of what's in the country with coming earth changes and things that are going to happen. They want to be able to recreate what they had, or at least have a memory of what's here today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about giants? Have you remote viewed giants?
Oh yeah. I love some of the ancient history, and I've looked at a number of the megalithic structures on the planet. There are some of these huge structures, and you think, how did they even build these things, like the pyramids, or some of these huge walls out there, big structures that we don't quite understand how they came to be. And there have been giants involved in some of the production of these. Giants really are a non-human or non-human mixed with human. I mean, that's even right out of the Bible, that the sons of God came down and mated with the daughters of man, and they created these giants. And so I think that those ancient stories, biblical traditions, it's based on some real event. So yeah, the giants are fascinating. You tend to think of a giant as being kind of brutish and huge and maybe a little malevolent and just getting his own way and being able to build things. But you know what? They were super intelligent. They not only had the brawn, but they had the brains as well. Brilliant tacticians, brilliant builders, and even mathematicians. It's kind of interesting. I think the giants have been misunderstood.
Yeah, that's very important. I had an experience, or like a vivid dream, and in this dream, I was at some place, and I was in a room, a hall with other people. It was like a viewing area, and then all of a sudden, like there were 12 giants that just walked in. They were like 15 foot tall. They radiated this really benevolent energy. Almost like masters of wisdom, and they just came in.
Exactly.
And they just stood in front of that audience, and everyone was, it wasn't worship, it was just like deep respect for these giants. Right. So that's kind of like matching what you said.
Yeah, that's my take on the giants. I don't think that they were big, brutish. They were just big,
right?
But brilliant and interesting and intellectuals for sure.
Yeah, well, I got from these beings that they were kind of very loving, that there was a loving energy coming out of them. That was interesting. Oops, you're frozen. Okay, wow.
We're back.
We're having interference.
I think not. Somebody doesn't want us to talk about these things.
Yeah, obviously not. So I was just adding that in the experience I had, I felt that these giants, they were very loving. There was a loving energy coming from them.
Yeah,
which is completely opposite to what you get in the Old Testament, the Bible.
Exactly. That's why I think they're misunderstood. Every time I've looked at them, and I've looked at them a number of times, I'm fascinated with them. They really are cool. I would love to hang out with the giants. I think it would be a blast. I would learn so much, and I would not be afraid. They just do not seem any scary in any way, shape, or form. They're just really cool individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So have you done any recent remote viewings that you want to share, that you thought, your findings were really kind of interesting, that my audience would be interested in?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to be posting on my YouTube very soon, within the next week, a session that I did on the biggest secret in the world. Now, I've looked at this a number of times. Now you have to think, okay, so who has this secret? How is this the biggest secret in the world? Well, when you see this session, you'll understand why. It has to do with these coming Earth changes. The government literally knows the dates when certain things are going to happen. In fact, they've known this for some time. It's the reason that disclosure has started off as this slow disclosure since 2017. They're rolling this out because they know that on a certain date, and they know exactly what date this is, that there is going to be a return, a flotilla, if you will. There are going to be ships that are going to come in. And so they have to disclose before the ships come in. In fact, we looked at this 25 years ago, John Vivanco and I, and we used to call it the big event. Well, that date is rapidly approaching now toward this big event. And the way that the government is preparing for this is absolutely fascinating. So I'm very excited to share this session. I think people will find it interesting, maybe a little scary, maybe a little exciting, depending on what your interest is in all of this. But they're building those bunkers. They are getting things prepared for any kind of global unrest, but they know what date that those ships are coming. And I believe it's the return of the Anunnaki. That's what I think it is.
Fascinating. Yeah. So your website is, or your YouTube channel is No Rivets.
No Rivets.
All of these remote viewings up there, and as of probably, November 20, your new channeling on the biggest secret will be there. So
that's right. The biggest secret, and some really other cool things coming up too. Some other cool ET experiences. I spoke at the Beyond the Brain conference last weekend on a project that I did on remote viewing the multiverse. So I managed to remote view different dimensions, different universes, and different timelines. I looked at myself in 63 different timelines. This project took me some years. And what's super interesting, some of these timelines, I'm married, some I'm divorced, some I don't have a partner, some I am really fat, some I'm in amazing shape. And there's one thing that's consistent across all of these timelines. I have a dog in every single one.
Wow.
So I'm going to share some of those live remote viewing sessions that I videoed so that people can also take a look at the multiverse and see what it's like. What is it like in a different timeline or a different dimension or a different universe? It's interesting stuff and offers, I think, a lot of clues perhaps to the philosophical and scientific community about what some of these possibilities are. Different scientists may look at this and see things in my data that maybe I didn't notice was important or was there because that's not my area of expertise. So,
yeah. Well, that sounds like a fascinating remote viewing as well. Yes. So do you have information for people that are maybe interested in learning how to remote view or getting in touch with you?
If you want to learn, you can learn absolutely for free. All of the things you see me do on my YouTube channel, I have a free workshop on my channel. It's called You Can Map Too. And it's 3.5 hours. And I teach you literally all the steps that you see me do in these sessions. And so you will be able to go ahead and learn it yourself for free. Now, if you want some in-depth training or to learn more about what I do, I have 2 websites. My personal website is norivets.com. And that's where I have personal essays and I post videos and talk about this and that. And then my business website is transdimensionalmapping.com. And all of our classes are listed there, plus information about our method of remote viewing, transdimensional mapping. And we also have a student development group called Mapping Mavericks. And we have around 100 students in that now, more joining all the time. And it's ongoing student development for those who want to do this operationally, work in the real world as a remote viewer.
Fascinating. Well, you've shared a lot of great information for people, and I'm really glad you're back and sharing your remote viewing results. I'm sure people are going to benefit greatly, and I look forward to seeing some of your upcoming remote viewings.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. It was delightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.